One of history's most consequential assassinations, the killing of Archduke Franz Ferdinand on June 28, 1914 in Sarajevo, sparked World War I. But why did this happen? What drove a group of young men to murder the heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne? Let's find out. To understand why Franz Ferdinand died, we need to understand the powder keg that was in the Balkans in 1914. The Austro-Hungarian Empire had recently annexed Bosnia-Herzegovina in 1908, absorbing millions of Slavic people who didn't want to be part of this empire. Many of these South Slavs, Serbs in particular, dreamed of a united South Slavic state, free from foreign rule. This is where our assassins enter the story. They were members of Young Bosnia, a revolutionary movement of mostly Serbian and Bosnian students who wanted to liberate their people from Austro-Hungarian control. These weren't hardened terrorists or professional killers. They were teenagers and young men in their early 20s, fueled by nationalism, romanticism, and the idealism of youth. The ringleader of the plot was Gavrilo Princip. He was just 19 years old, a small, sickly student who had been rejected from military service because he was too frail. But what he lacked in physical strength he made up in conviction. Princip and his co-conspirators believed deeply that violence was the only language that empires understood. Now these young men didn't act alone. Behind them stood a shadowy organisation called the Black Hand, officially known as Unification or Death. This was a secret military society run by Serbian army officers, and its goal was to create a greater Serbia by any means necessary. The head of the Black Hand was known by the code name Apis. The Black Hand provided the weapons, 4 pistols, 6 bombs and cyanide capsules for the assassins to take after the deed so they couldn't be interrogated. They also provided training and helped smuggle the conspirators across the border from Serbia into Bosnia. It's crucial to note here that while the Serbian government probably knew something was brewing, there's no solid evidence they officially sanctioned the assassination. In fact, some Serbian officials tried to warn Austria, though their warnings were vague and ultimately ignored. So why Franz Ferdinand specifically? Why that day? The answers both reveal careful planning and symbolic significance. Franz Ferdinand represented the Austro-Hungarian Empire at its highest level. As the heir apparent, killing him would strike at the very heart of the empire. But there's a deeper irony here, that the assassins either didn't know or didn't care about. Franz Ferdinand was actually one of the more progressive members of the Habsburg family. He had plans to reform the empire, potentially giving more autonomy to Slavic peoples through a proposed United States of Greater Austria. But to the young Bosnia conspirators, he was simply the symbol of their oppression. The date mattered too. June 28th was Vidovdan, a hugely significant date in Serbian history. It marked the anniversary of the Battle of Kosovo in 1389, where the Ottomans defeated the Serbians. It was a day of martyrdom, sacrifice and national memory. For Franz Ferdinand to visit Sarajevo on this day, in a recently annexed province full of resentful Serbs, was either incredibly tone-deaf or incredibly arrogant. The assassins saw it as the perfect moment to strike. Let's talk about the brighter context, because assassination plots don't emerge from nowhere. The early 20th century was an age of anarchist violence and political assassination. Kings, presidents and prime ministers were being killed across Europe and America. Terrorism was seen by some revolutionary groups as a legitimate tool of political change. The young Bosnia conspirators were inspired by these acts and believed they could spark a revolution through violence. There was also the intoxicating nationalism of the era. The 19th century had seen Italy and Germany unify into nation-states. Why not the South Slavs? Serbian nationalism was particularly intense, fueled by recent victories in the Balkan Wars of 1912 and 1913, which had expanded Serbian territory in confidence. Many Serbs believed their destiny was to lead a united South Slavic nation, and Bosnia was seen as rightful heirs, not Austria-Hungary's. And let's not forget the personal motivations. These were young men, some suffering from tuberculosis like Princip, who believed they had nothing to lose. They saw themselves as heroes, martyrs in waiting, who will be remembered forever for a striking blow for freedom. The romanticism of sacrifice for the nation was powerful in their minds. The assassination itself almost didn't happen. The first attempt that morning involved Chabranovic, a co-conspirator of Princip's, throwing a bomb at the Archduke's car. It bounced off and exploded under the next vehicle, injuring several people but missing Franz Ferdinand entirely. The other conspirators stationed along the route lost their nerves and didn't act. It seemed like the plot had failed. But then came the twist of fate. After reception at City Hall, Franz Ferdinand insisted on visiting the wounded from the bombing at the hospital. His driver took a wrong turn, stopped to reverse and stalled the car directly in front of a cafe, where Gavrilo Princip happened to be standing, probably thinking the day's opportunity had passed. Princip seized the moment. He stepped forward, pulled out his pistol and fired 2 shots. One hit Franz Ferdinand in the neck, the other struck his wife Sophie in the abdomen. Both would die within the hour. Princip tried to swallow his cyanide, but it only made him vomit. He tried to shoot himself, but was tackled by the crowd. So why was Franz Ferdinand killed? The simple answer is that he was assassinated by Serbian nationalists who wanted to free Bosnia from Austro-Hungarian rule, and saw terrorism as a legitimate weapon against imperial oppression. They were backed by a secret military organisation with its own agenda for a greater Serbia, and they struck on a day heavy with symbolic meaning for Serbian national identity. But the deeper answer involves the toxic mix of nationalism, militarism, imperial decline, and youthful radicalism that defined the era. Franz Ferdinand was killed because he represented an empire that had absorbed peoples who desperately wanted independence. He was killed because revolutionary groups believed violence could spark political change. He was killed because centuries of ethnic and religious tensions in the Balkans. And he was killed because a few young men, convinced of the righteousness of their cause, were willing to murder for it. What they couldn't have known, and what no one could have known, was that these 2 pistol shots would have set off a chain reaction leading to World War I, the deaths of millions and redrawing of the map of Europe. Their act of terrorism achieved its immediate goal, but unleashed consequences far beyond anything they imagined. That's it for today's episode. The assassination of Franz Ferdinand reminds us that individual acts driven by specific grievances and beliefs can have world-changing consequences. Thanks for listening and watching, and if you enjoyed, please subscribe, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.